anyhow, so I'm just suggesting that Hegel's philosophy be something that we turn to consider this biophilosophy. Even the Hegel Bulletin from the Great Britain Hegel Society, they published a special issue back in 2020, volume 41, special issue 3, specifically about Hegel's philosophy of biology. The Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute's conference for this year, which we're planning for December, we're going to try to focus on this topic. And anyhow, so I'm just mentioning these things here. I think it's an appropriate place to mention them. And any other thoughts about them, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna, for bringing Hegel into this conversation. I totally agree. Super relevant for any biophilosophy. And yeah, how you've laid his system out really, I thought was extremely helpful and integrative for me. I mean, I have a new way of understanding the master-slave dialectic as overcoming that animal instinct to assimilate through this love, mutual recognition. So yeah, thank you. Lots to think about there. Krishna, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. I wanted to suggest looking to Hegel's philosophy for a conceptual framework that allows or gives some scope for the nuanced continuum between the non-living and the living, from the mechanical through the chemical to the biological and human. This is a talk that was given at a conference that our institute had last year that I mentioned in the comments section, that our serving director, Dr. Bimata Vipuri, gave, where Hegel gives a nice framework that explains self-other dynamics as a means and the extent to which self can integrate and sustain the integration of its other as a means for conceptualizing the nuances that separate but also kind of unify these 3 or 4 areas in nature. So in mechanism, in the mechanical entities in nature, so throughout mechanical, chemical, biological, and human, the identity of a self is always found in its other. And the capacity to which the self can claim its identity through integrating its other is the capacity to which it is a suitable form of spirit, essentially, right? Because in Hegel's philosophy, nature is spirit in its externality, and the transition from nature to spirit is the human anthropology. And so in mechanism, when we say that the self of a mechanical entity is in its other, what do we mean? So it's the surface of the entity, of the mechanical entity. Let's take a pool ball, right? The surface of a pool ball is determined by the flatness of the table it's intended to roll across, right? Or a gear, the teeth of a gear are such, they're determined by the way they're supposed to interlock with other gears. So in this way, the self of a mechanical entity is determined by its other. But with mechanical entities, when they come in contact with another, they simply collide. There's no deeper sense of integration that becomes clearer what we mean by a deeper sense of integration in chemical, biological, and human. They simply, the surfaces collide, and that's it. So the significance of why that's a less significant degree of embodiment of spirit becomes clear when we look at the chemical entity. Now, chemicals are they're polar, right? There's polarity, there's attraction between chemicals. So in mechanical bodies also, external, there has to be external agency that brings those bodies together, gravity, an external force. There's no internal impetus for the mechanical bodies to come together. Now that starts to transition into chemical bodies when we get to magnetism, right? Because there are mechanical objects that are magnetic, and chemicals are inherently polar, they're magnetic. That's a form of magnetism. So when chemical entities come together, they don't just collide, right? They react. There's a chemical transformation. But the product of the chemical reaction remains unstable. It continues to react with other chemicals. It doesn't form. So for instance, when hydrogen and oxygen react, they form water, which is a pretty stable product, but still it can react with a gas, methane, and form methane crystals in the ocean. So the product of chemical reactions, although it's a more significant unity than we find with mechanical entities, still it doesn't reach like a sustained unity. It's always open to further drastic reaction where it can completely become something else. So in biological entities, we find that it's a more sustained unity, because when two biological entities come together, basically it's predation, right? One organism will eat the other organism. But instead of transforming, like when oxygen and hydrogen come together, they're both gases and they become a liquid, water, right? But when a biological entity encounters another biological entity, a bear and a salmon, or a bear and a blueberry bush, they don't transform into something new. Rather, the bear integrates its other into itself, right? Even though the salmon and the blueberry bush are distinct entities, in the biological process, they are disintegrated and reintegrated into the being of the bear. And so that's a more lasting unity, right? Because the bear doesn't radically transform like in chemical reactions. And so following this train of thought, as we developed it during the conference last year, we're still working on fleshing this out. So with the human, so the way that the biological unity becomes disturbed is during reproduction, where the biological entity now, it can't integrate its other in the same way it does during consumption when it comes to reproduction. Rather, its other has to remain outside of itself for reproduction to work. So that unity where it integrates other into itself is disrupted in that way. And so now that leaves, the necessity for how does a human, how is it superior to biological entities in this logic that we're trying to keep here? Well, the unity with its other becomes something that occurs in thought. So up until this point, the unity with other required basically the annihilation of the other in its previous form. But in the human's elevated capacity for thought, the other doesn't have to be annihilated to be integrated into the human. And also, so based on the whole reproduction line of thought, there is a capacity for love, a loving exchange, where it's not just an animalistic reproductive exchange, rather there's love and affection and emotional unity that overcomes the animalistic aggression that's involved in reproduction.